I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, non-Orthodox conversions in Israel. Last week, Israel's Supreme Court recognized reform and conservative conversions carried out in Israel, and such converts now will be considered Jews for citizenship purposes under Israel's law of return. The decision was the culmination of an appeal process that began more than 15 years ago, involving 12 people who converted to Judaism through non-Orthodox denominations. The justices of the Supreme Court stated the reason for delay in issuing judgment to allow the State of Israel and the Israeli Knesset to legislate the matter, yet it had failed to do so. What does this decision mean? And what is the Israeli public attitude towards the issue? To answer this question and more, I'm happy to have with us all the way from Israel, our dear friend, Ben-Dror Yemini. Yemini is a journalist, speaker, a leading political commentator in Israel, and the author of the book Industry of Lies, published in 2014, a must-read for all of us dealing with anti-Israel bias. Ben-Dror, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me, Shahar.
So first of all, how are you doing now that Israel is open? How is the overall feeling? I think there is no more quarantine, right? No more restrictions?
Well, I must admit it's an experience to go to a restaurant or to a coffee house, even in the evening. It's quite new. I mean, we forgot it. It's a year now. It's about a year now that we did not have it. And yes, I hope it will stay like this. I hope things are not going to get worse, but nobody knows. I mean, for the moment, it feels great. It feels great, I must tell you.
And let's also state that Israel already has over 5 million people vaccinated.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, Israel, I think it's only one country that has all the vaccinations that are needed to all the population. Unfortunately, some people, like in many other places in Europe, in the United States, some people do not believe in the vaccination. Some people, believe in rumors saying that it's quite dangerous and so on. But every day we have about 100,000 people that are vaccinated, and I hope it will continue like that. Yes.
I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are envious at that situation, whether it's here in the Americas or in Europe. Many people look at Israel with quite amount of jealousy.
Yeah, I know. And because I have some connections in the US and in France, well, to tell you a secret, my wife is half American, half French. So I'm quite familiar with families who are telling us, oh, how great it is to be now in Israel, and we are looking for vaccination. It's just impossible, and so on and so on. So yes,
it's great.
Yes.
It's amazing, and we wish everyone the best of health and as quickly as possible to get out of this.
I must tell you. I mean, I guess you know my political views, and maybe not everybody who is listening to us, but I'm not a big supporter of Netanyahu. But in that sense, we really have to thank Netanyahu that did whatever he can with a lot of success in order to have enough supply for all the population, and probably eventually including the Palestinians.
Well, you know what you just said is I think super important, because I think in general, when you talk about politics today, people don't take a minute to give credit where credit is due, even if it's for a political adversary. And therefore, your position, and that's why I like speaking with you so much, because you are that kind of person who's mainstream, who can acknowledge, to give credit, even if you disagree with somebody politically.
Yeah, I think it should be like this. Unfortunately, now we are too many times we are quite biased. It's just like, it reminds me that whenever I'm coming to give a lecture in any Jewish community in the United States, people are warning me and telling me, don't say a word about Trump. Okay, now it's not Trump anymore, but like it's so delicate, you cannot say, well, I'm not going to speak about Trump. It's not my expertise, but people are so sensitive from being biased to one direction or another. I'm not. Yes, you're right. I'm not. I'm trying to wake up every morning and to look at the facts and at the circumstances in order to know what should I write and what should I think and what should I say.
which is a perfect segue to dive into the issue we have today for which we want to talk to you about, the decision of the Israeli Supreme Court. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about what it actually means? What does this decision mean about the conversion process in Israel?
Well, I must tell you something. It's something which is very symbolic because it's not concerning to hundreds of thousands of people. It's dealing with something like some hundreds of people. That's all. I mean, that's the whole story. I mean, it's not going to change anything. But because of the symbolic meaning of the decision, it became such a problem with a huge debate which is taking place right now. It's very interesting because actually the decision is saying, just in order to clarify, that conversions by conservatives and by reforms, rabbis of course, in Israel will be recognized. Just to make clear that conversion that has been done in the US or France or any other place of reformist rabbis or by conservative rabbis is already recognized. Now Israel is joining the party. So it's not a big deal, but it's very symbolic. It is very symbolic because it's, an election time. And it's very delicate because of the relationship between the majority in Israel and the minority, namely the ultra-Orthodox, as we call them here in Israel, the Haredim. There is a big problem also because of the coronavirus, and we cannot ignore it. I mean, people are quite frustrated because of the behavior of the Haredim. Not all of them, I don't want to make generalizations, it's not the issue, but there is a kind of problem. And now this Supreme Court decision is a kind of addition to an atmosphere, I would even say hostile atmosphere towards the Haredim. We had enough with you. We had enough.
I just want to, before we go into the general political context, I just want to summarize for our viewers. The Supreme Court's ruling indicates, like you said, that reform and conservative conversions made in Israel will be recognized. And as you mentioned, conversions of such nature, reform and conservative, that were made outside of Israel are already recognized. So the question comes to be, when you say recognized, it means what? What does it mean recognized? Are these converts are considered to be Jews for any matter, any purpose and reason?
Not by the religious authorities, not by the rabbinate, but by the, for example, the interior ministry. I mean, they must accept them according to the law of return. That's the meaning. But again, we are not speaking about many people, but we are speaking about one more issue, which is part of the story of the election, the relationship between politics and the Supreme Court in Israel. I mean, the problem exists everywhere, even in the United States. I mean, what should the Supreme Court decide? How far should the Supreme Court should interfere in politics and in the decisions of the Congress? The same problems exist in Israel. I mean, who are you to decide? This is one of the questions.
Right. So Ben-Dror, here is the question. According to the information we have, this petition has been before the court for almost over 15 years. And then the court makes a ruling 3 weeks before a major elections?
Now, it's very interesting because in this case, I mean, many times I do justify and I do criticize myself the criticism against the Supreme Court. I don't want what we call in Israel the judicial activism, which means a kind of imperialism. I mean, they want to decide everything. I mean, who needs election when we have the judges of the Supreme Court? Not in this case. Why not in this case? Because in this case, we had 9 judges. 4 of them are conservatives, 2 of them are religious. And you know what? They all joined the decision. And I think you mentioned one of the reasons. And one of the reasons was that after 15 years, that the Supreme Court is waiting. And the Supreme Court is telling the government and the Knesset, the parliament, you should make the decision, not us. And they decline. And the Supreme Court is waiting and waiting and waiting. And the government even appointed two committees in order to make the decisions. And they even the conclusions of the two committees were on the table of the government, but nothing was decided upon. So the Supreme Court and the religious judges decided eventually we cannot wait anymore. I mean,
Ben-Dror, the issues of
you should make the decision. You should make the. But if you are not making the decision, for the time being, we are taking the decision.
But it seems that the Israeli political system is adamant at not making decisions. We've seen this with the Sharansky compromise vis-a-vis the wall, when the government had a compromise on the table and then retracted as a result of the political. Could it be that Israel, I mean, is the court the right arena to make those decisions? And if the political system can't do it, maybe we have to come up with another system, because obviously it's not happening.
Generally speaking, yes, you're right. Generally speaking, yes, I don't think that the relationship between the Supreme Court and the government are based on any constitution. That's why we have a problem. We don't have a constitution in Israel, so you don't really know what are the limits of the Supreme Court and when and where should the Supreme Court interfere. We don't know. We don't have rules about that in Israel. So the Supreme Court is quite active, which means many times, even to my opinion, I think they are going too far in making decisions and in revoking legitimate decisions of the government or of the Knesset. But in this case, because it is very delicate, because it is very sensitive, the Supreme Court restrained itself again and again for 15 years, even 16 actually. I mean, this time, I mean, even if you complain about the Supreme Court concerning other issues and other decisions, you cannot say it in this case, because in this case, because of the problematic issue, because it is, it is connected to the relationship of Israel with the diaspora. It is connected to a lot of other things, political things. They did not want to take the decision.
And
eventually they were forced actually to take the decision.
But it's been almost, as you say, 16 years. 3 weeks before the elections, do you think that was wise on the side of the court? Shouldn't they have waited to have a government in Israel? They already waited 16 years.
You raise a very good point. I mean, even people who support the decision say, wait, the timing is terrible, because now you put something else on the whole election campaign from all sides, of course, and it was not your role to do it. So yes, nothing is perfect. I mean, so that's why I'm saying maybe the time, you can criticize the timing from one hand. From the other hand, you can say that this decision for itself was the right thing to do, even not in the right time.
And how has been, what was the public's reaction to this, the general public? I mean, I can imagine what the ultra-Orthodox said, I can imagine what the Masorti movement, Reform, Conservatives said, but the general public, what was the reaction? What was the public sentiment?
A big debate, which is taking place in every newspaper, and it goes like usual. People who are against this kind of judicial imperialism and activism and whatsoever were against the decision, and many others, of course, those who are supporting, generally speaking, the Supreme Court interference, supported it. The point is that you have to bear in mind that in public polls, you find out actually that even the religious people, not speaking about the ultra-Orthodox, not speaking about Haredim, had enough with this behavior of the Haredim concerning conversion, because they put so many obstacles. I mean, there were solutions. There was a compromise. They actually rejected everything. They said no to every proposal. Why? Because they want a kind of monopoly. They want to make the decisions only by themselves without any compromise. But I mean, enough, because you are a minority of something like 12% in Israel. You cannot dictate everything. So it's not the regular debate between, right-wingers and left-wingers. Not at all, not this time. This time we're speaking about the majority, including most of the religious people who are saying to the ultra-Orthodox, to the Haredim, enough, just enough. We cannot bear it anymore. We need a compromise. And there is a big mistake, because we are speaking in the US now. There is a big mistake because many people, when I give lectures, and they think that the Israeli public opinion is against the reformists and the conservatives. Not at all. I'm speaking about the majority in Israel. We and you are in the same boat. We are in the same boat. Sometimes it's not clear to many Jewish communities in the United States because they do not understand the coalition structure in Israel, which is giving a lot of power to minorities, like the Haredi minority, like the ultra-Orthodox minority. They don't understand it, but you should know, and I'm telling now to our audience, to our viewers, you have to know we are in the same boat. Most Israelis are supporting this kind of conversion by reformists, by conservatives. Yes, they do support. And you mentioned the Kotel compromise. Most Israelis, including the religious people, supported the compromise, which was initiated by people like Natan Sharansky. Now, most Israelis supported it. The problem is that the government, because of coalition pressure, and it was mainly Netanyahu who actually revoked the compromise. You have to bear it in mind. Yes, we have a problem, but the majority in Israel supports the same kind of solutions that was accepted by all communities, Orthodox, conservatives, reformists.
You allude to a very important point here. The complex system in Israel is such that some people may think that the ultra-Orthodox equal the Israeli right wing, but it was actually Naftali Bennett, the head of Yamina party, and somebody who's very much in the focus of the coming elections, who said yesterday that Netanyahu is a prisoner of the ultra-Orthodox, and they've been holding him hostage. And even though they are natural partners to him, to Bennett, they're not going to control the agenda. So there seems to be saturation of that command of the ultra-Orthodox in the Israeli politics, not just in the circles of center-left, but also within the right-wing establishment.
Yeah, more than that. When he was, Naftali Bennett, you mentioned him, when he was education minister, he paid a visit to a reformist elementary school. I don't know where it was. It was somewhere in...
Right here in Manhattan. I believe it was Solomon Schechter in Manhattan. You're right.
And you know what? He was criticized by who? By the ultra-Orthodox. But most of the Israelis, needless to say, most of the religious people in Israel supported him. What do you mean? I mean, they are our brothers. What are you talking about? They said to the Haredim. But he was criticized by some. Okay, I don't want to tell you that 100% of the religious non-ultra-Orthodox supported him, but I would say, according to polls that I presented again and again, and I'm speaking about reliable polls, not speaking about, we know that when we are speaking about polls, it's not. I'm speaking about reliable polls. Most of the religious people supported him in his visit to that school of reformists.
You're talking about the general, very thin seam that exists within Israeli society between the ultra-Orthodox and the general public, the secular, the religious. There was a major piece in the New York Times last weekend by Ronen Bergman talking about, the crisis in Israel under the, in the background of COVID-19. So you're talking about COVID-19, you're talking about this religious intolerance towards reform and conservative. this delicate situation is going to manifest itself in the coming elections. What's the situation like that on the ground?
Right now, I think that Netanyahu is totally backed. He's totally backed by the ultra-Orthodox, by the Haredim. He is totally now it's creating a problem for him because most people are against this kind of coalition, this kind of minority that is controlling actually so many things concerning the identity of Israel as a Jewish state. So people had enough with it, so it's going to be against him. What will be the impact of the decision of and of this alliance between Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox? I don't know yet. It's, we have 2 weeks, everything can change in Israel. But right now, it looks like if it's playing against him and not in favor of him right now.
Do you expect backlash to the decision in the form maybe of a law passed by the Knesset meant to overrule or overcome the Supreme Court's decision after the elections? Do you expect this to be a reality?
First thing, yes, everything is possible right now, but we have to bear in mind that they do not have the majority. I mean, one of the reasons that nothing was decided upon in the last 50 years was that from one hand, yes, the ultra-Orthodox did not want to change anything. They wanted to keep control from one hand. But from the other hand, they never had a majority in the Knesset in order to pass a law that is actually accepting their point of view about Giyur, about conversion. So actually, from one hand, they succeeded to delay the decision. From the other hand, they did not have enough power in order to impose a new law that accepting their point of view.
It's interesting to note that the discussion is not only made within Israeli society as a whole, but also it reaches the shores of the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. One of the Knesset members, an ultra-Orthodox Knesset member, made a statement that women who were converted in the IDF during their service are just like Gentiles. And I'm wondering what has been the public reaction, public sentiment towards that.
It was something like 99% against him, including most of the ultra-Orthodox Knesset members. And he himself retracted and said, I'm sorry, I did not have to say, I'm sorry that I said what I said. So even he himself was against himself. But it just showing you that the issue is quite sensitive in Israel. And for the ultra-Orthodox, any conversion is unacceptable. Even of, for example, we have a group that is called Zohar, which is of moderate rabbis, Orthodox, completely Orthodox. And they are not accepted by the rabbinate, they are not accepted by the ultra-Orthodox. So the rift is not between religious people or right-wing people and the others. The rift is between ultra-Orthodox and all the others. And you know what? Even among the ultra-Orthodox, for example, a Knesset member, he used to be a Knesset member from Shas, ultra-Orthodox party, Rav Chaim Amsalem, Rabbi Chaim Amsalem. He is totally against the ultra-Orthodox parties. And he is saying again and again, conversion should be in a very moderate way. And people who want to be Jews, we have to let them in without all this kind of obstacles that you put in the way of conversion. So even among them, there are some opinions, but the leadership is quite extremist.
You're talking about, it's very interesting perception-wise, because you're talking about Rabbi Amsalem, who is a Mizrahi Sephardic Shas rabbi. In the general perception, it always seems like they are the most remote in their extremism, but the truth is quite the opposite. From Rabbi Amsalem himself, including the late Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, when you talk about the IDF and conversion, who allowed mass conversions at some point as being Gdol Hador, one of the leaders of the generation that opened the door and was a moderate ruler. So in that regard, I believe we could use more of that.
We have to remember that You are mentioning Rav Ovadia, the late Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. He was the first one to say that the Jews from Ethiopia, black Jews, are completely Jews. I mean, he was the first one actually to accept them as part of the Jewish community. And yes, they are much more moderate. Unfortunately, I have to say, some of them are becoming more and more religious, more and more ultra-Orthodox. They are losing the heritage of the Mizrahi Jews, or Jews who came from the Muslim world. I mean, they were much more moderate. I do remember my own grandfather, who was the chief rabbi of the Yemenite community. Yes, they were much more moderate. Unfortunately, this is not the direction of many of them. This is not.
You know, it reminds me, you're still talking about Shas, and there was another former member of Knesset, I believe, Guetta, right? Who
Yes.
Actually had to leave the party because he attended an LGBT wedding, right?
Yeah, completely. And now he is a very famous journalist. And it's a good example, Guetta and Rabbi and Ray Amsalem, they are a good example of what could be. I mean, you can be religious, and yet you can be open-minded. And this is what we need, actually. Unfortunately, the leadership, the ultra-Orthodox leadership, is taking us to the opposite direction, unfortunately.
Well, Ben-Dror, I just want to say big thank you for your insights. It's always illuminating and encouraging to listen to you and to hear what you have to say. And I look forward to having you again on JBS. I would love to talk to you about the International Criminal Court, its decisions and recent moves against Israel, because I believe that there is much that the public needs to be aware of when it comes to that decision. Will you come on next week?
Thank you for having me. And yes, sure. Next time we will meet about the ICC. Thank you
so much. Thank you. And to all I say, stay safe and stay healthy. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland.
Back to Israel and make Aliyah, and you will have the vaccination in a minute.
For sure. Thank you, Ben-Dror. I'm sure many would when you wave the syringe. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golob, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Shalom and lehitraot.